You may recall from quite some time ago a video of mine discussing and reviewing two different iHome alarm clocks, primarily for use with the lodging industry. And it would seem that just this past week a third has recently graced my presence. This is model iP86, tuned from AM 520 to 1710 kHz and 87.5 to 107.9. And unlike those iHomes discussed in that video, this one is primarily targeted toward consumers and not commercial customers. So there aren't any instructions on the top. In fact, this looks to have been some sort of a gift or something to that effect, judging by the insignia here. It says Crest Invitational. Haven't the foggiest idea what that might actually be. After connecting it to power, the first problem becomes clear. There's no backlight. So the backlighting for the buttons is working, set to its brightest setting, but the display is totally dark, and no matter how the brightness changes with the dimmer control, it doesn't actually affect anything on the screen. I was going to pass this up, but based upon my prior experience, audio fidelity with these iHomes, most of them that is actually pretty passable. You get some basic controls at the top. Two iPod docks. They're not sure what purpose would really be served by having two different docks. Maybe if you just want to charge both at the same time. And it actually has an adapter here, which you just remove if you're using an older iPod, but if you're using something newer and thinner, just use one of these adapters and additional support so you're not placing all that stress on the connector. And these are the 30-pin connectors, which is fine by me because the only Apple device that I own is an iPod that has been arguably outmoded by many other new generations. But I so seldom use it that I don't ever see a reason to upgrade. I usually just use CD players and everything else, so an iPod really serves no purpose. But you have controls here for playing and pausing the iPod in dock 1 and the iPod in dock number 2. And then have here preset buttons number 1 through 8 that seemingly do not do anything when called upon to do something. Just pressing the buttons doesn't achieve it. Well, I stand corrected. It seems that the presets are now working, and that will lead me to my next course of discussion. That is the electrical gremlins that are haunting this. Probably, again, what caused it to be discarded. Because playing audio through it works fine most of the time, but after about 10 or 15 minutes of moderate to heavy playback volume, the audio will begin to cut out. And it'll become very faint and hard to hear, sometimes with just the left channel being audible, sometimes the right channel. And there's nothing that I've been able to do to change that, so it's probably something wrong with the amplifier. And I'm surprised the presets are actually working because they weren't before. There's also some controls for the clock. Eagle-eyed viewers that are comparing this to the iHomes discussed in my previous video might have noticed the EQ button, which was not present on those two other models. On the rear are some buttons for adjusting the time, syncing the time with an appropriate device connected to the dock, time zone, line input, and an AM antenna connector. And there's the obligatory FM wire antenna, which is still wrapped in its protective plastic bag up until about an hour ago when I finally removed it from its protective packaging. Bottom of the unit isn't all that exciting, with just a single battery compartment to maintain time and alarm settings in the event of a power failure. Of course, being part of the iHome brand, you can play and wake to music from your iPod, but also the AM or FM tuner. Quite nice to actually have an AM tuner, because if you may recall, those previous iHomes were intended for use in hotels And of course, with hotels being the way they are, and well, there's just interference just about everywhere. So putting an AM tuner in something that would be placed in hotels would be pointless and needless, because you can't listen to AM in hotels. There's so much interference. You can see the radio's working now, but I might as well capture this on video before it begins misbehaving again, just to demonstrate its audio quality. And audio quality is really something that is quite stunning for something that at first glance would lead you to believe is just so cheap, just a run-of-the-mill alarm clock for use with an iPod. If you press this EQ button on the top, there's controls for the treble, which I usually leave to 0. It was set all the way to +5 when I received it, but the audio was very shrill and unpleasant. And then bass, which I actually set all the way to +5, because these are very small speakers. Something called 3D sound, which exaggerates the stereo image between the two stereo speakers. And then balance, if for whatever reason one channel is quieter than the other. So that wouldn't really, I wouldn't ever see that being a problem, because the speakers are so close to one another. So that's it for the EQ. And then there's a sleep control, which proves that I don't know everything. My video review of that Sony alarm clock radio, I mentioned that the sleep behavior, which allows you to fall asleep to the sounds of your favorite radio station or songs on your iPod, if the need be, the device will then turn off automatically. And I said that was a feature that has been forgotten with the sands of time, which obviously, judging by this, is not the case. It goes to show you can't believe everything you read, or in this case hear, on the internet. So time for some audio testing. And position this antenna away from the ballast of this lamp, which just loves to create interference. And it's already acting up. I hear audio only out of the right channel. Left channel is totally dead. See, and now it returned. But it's not something wrong with the volume control, because this is a rotary controller, if I'm not mistaken, or rotary encoder. So this is just hooked up to a little reader that then relays that to the logic of this device to turn up the volume. This is not a potentiometer or something like that. Audio quality really is exceptional, though. Oh, there we go again. Now it's the left channel. And now it's the right channel. I keep switching. Not sure if you're able to hear on the camera the bass response, but it's best to place this with some sort of flat surface behind it to reflect the bass frequencies from the bass ports back at you. And when I had this sitting about here, the audio was very treble rich but lacking in the bass, and then when I moved it over closer to the wall, and this isn't ideal being an air conditioner with foam and dust filter, absorbs a lot of those frequencies, bass response increased tremendously.
Schedule a free consultation at caninecompany.com.
If you're a homeowner looking for a contractor to work on your home, here are some things you should know. Business is not really all about money. Business is about relationships. Business is about...
Oh yeah, try telling that to the big box stores these days. Well, how's that for an AirSats AM antenna replacement? It's a brake cable from a bicycle. It's precariously positioned so as to touch one of the terminals of the AM antenna connection. And previously described misbehavior is, well, now making itself apparent. No volume, There's no audio, even though the volume's turned all the way up. Totally dead. Well, the audio isn't working, and neither are the iPod docks, either one of the two. So I'm going to do something that you'll likely never ever see me do again on this channel. Well, there we have it, folks. An exclusive video you won't find anywhere else on YouTube, showing you the insides of an iHome. Oh yeah, I don't even know what model this is. iP85, I believe. And there's a mess of just about everything that once comprised this entire alarm clock, now sitting on the floor. And I don't see anything that looks immediately obvious, aside from these no-name... Oh, well, maybe that's... I'm wondering if that's something that's spilled out of that capacitor, or they were supposed to... What is that? I'd be very interested in discovering the reason behind this waxy-looking substance on the exterior of this capacitor and on the board. There's something to be said for the build quality of older electronics over their newer counterparts, when this alarm clock from 2010 can't even remain in proper functional condition 7 years after its initial purchase and sale and design. And that Sony radio was from sometime in probably the 70s, and well, it works just fine, flawlessly. Just needs a few dial lamp lights to be replaced in it. And this thing, this hunk of junk, not even that old, probably fetched a pretty penny back in the day, probably $80 or $90. Doesn't even work. The backlight doesn't work. Audio doesn't work. Total junk. Garbage. Well, I think I've solved my problem. I think I know exactly where this unit should be relegated to, and that's the trash collection.